Joining me now, Wendy Osefo, Democratic strategist and professor of education at Johns Hopkins University and Joyce Vance. She's an NBC News legal analyst, former U.S. attorney, and professor at the University of Alabama School of Law. Joyce, I want to start with you. What's next for Derek Chauvin? What should we be expecting in terms of the process that will lead up to his sentencing and ultimately his imprisonment?
So most of what comes until the sentencing hearing itself will be fairly opaque to us as the public. But there will be a flurry of activity between the lawyers and the court because the prosecution intends to ask the judge to enhance Mr. Chauvin's sentence, to increase it over what would normally be authorized, the 150 months that the Minnesota guidelines call for. So there will be pleadings back and forth. Sentencing will be about 8 weeks out, although it looked from court filings this morning as though Chauvin has already been remanded to the custody of the head of the Minnesota Department of Corrections, since they believe that he will inevitably be sentenced to the custody of their prison system.
In terms of the appeals process, how does that factor into what we're going to see over the course of the next several months? We heard the judge say, some of the comments made by Congresswoman Maxine Waters could warrant an appeal. Do you think that's true in terms of this particular case, and how will that play out?
Well, first off, I don't think what Congresswoman Waters did is reversible error on appeal, and that's what all of this is about. Will there be some sort of error that was committed during the trial that will cause the higher courts in Minnesota to reverse one or more of Derek Chauvin's conviction? The prosecution has a little bit of insurance here, Zerlina. They've got 3 separate counts of conviction. The evidence was sufficient to support all of them, so these cases are unlikely to be reversed on that factual basis. And if there's a legal point of error, it's more than likely it would apply to just one of those counts of conviction, leaving others in place. That's sort of a long-winded legal explanation that says that this conviction should be fairly secure, barring something really unexpected at this point.
It's helpful to understand. Wendy, how do you process this verdict as a mom? I think a lot of Black people watching this, we see our family members, we see our fathers, our brothers, our cousins in George Floyd and in many of these videos that have been released. And finally, we get accountability. But how are you processing everything that's happening with this trial and verdict personally?
It is very hard to process, but if anything, you have to process this through the lens of systemic racism. You have to know that what we're seeing here is not an isolated incident. And what we know to be true is that so often we hear people say that we want to reform the police department, but the truth is you cannot reform a system that is broken. It has to be rebuilt. And as the mom of 2 Black boys, it hurts my heart because when I see George Floyd, I see my sons. When I see George Floyd, I see my husband. And I have an 8-year-old and a 6-year-old, and they're asking me, why is it that Black people are not treated equally to the same extent as their white counterparts? That is not fair. So if we're going to reform the system, we have to reform every aspect of racial inequality in this country. We're talking about healthcare. We're talking about housing. We are talking about environmental inequity. All of those things have to be addressed because we need to show the world that Black lives do matter. When I was coming on this show, I said to my son, what do you want me to say? What is a message you want me to get across? And he said, Mommy, just tell the world that Black lives matter. And that is what we need to know. We need to know that the whole system must be reformed.
When you talk about the conversation you had with your own kids, Wendy, it makes me think about, a question that comes up often in these cases from white mothers and parents where they say, well, my child's too young to talk about racism. I don't feel comfortable talking about race and racism with my small children. And yet you just articulated you don't get a choice. Black children do not get a choice as to whether or not they should have that conversation. So in your view, what should white mothers tell their children about the George Floyd case and the Derek Chauvin trial and, the fact that racism is an ongoing and persistent problem in this country?
Absolutely. If I have to break my children's innocence to prepare them for the world, then white parents have to be able to break their children's innocence to prepare them for the world. It is not fair that my 8-year-old and my 6-year-old cannot have a toy gun because as a mother, I remember Tamir Rice. And I know that oftentimes police officers shoot first and ask questions later. So if all of us have to be in this work together, we cannot do this in a silo. And we don't need people to come in and be allies. We need to extend that conversation further. We need accomplices. So if you're going to be an accomplice in this movement, you also have to talk to your children about what it means to be, non-racist. I always say we have to be anti-racist. It's not about being colorblind. No, that's not helping the situation. You have to be anti-racist. So I say to white parents, make sure you're having that conversation. Let them know who George Floyd is. Let them know who Derek Chauvin is. And let them know the history of racism, inequality in this country and what that looks like, because I'm having those conversations with my children.
Wendy Osefo and Joyce fans, thank you both for being here tonight, and please stay safe.